Hey, what's up everyone? Aaron from Unison here. Today I wanted to go over 4 different tips to help your kicks just hit harder, get that knock, get them just thumping in the mix. And also by doing this, it will help your bass to also just stand out in the mix more as well. So let's not waste any time and just dive right in. All right, so tip number 1, and it's probably the most important one, is going to be sample choice. And so when it comes to choosing samples for your song, I think it's super crucial, and having a good starting point when it comes to choosing samples, it usually leads to not having to do as much processing, not having to like surgically fix a bunch of stuff. If you have good samples from the get-go, it makes everything a lot more simpler, a lot more easier. And so a good analogy that, I'm sure if you watch other tutorials, a lot of people have talked about this, but seeing sample choice and seeing samples as like ingredients for when you're cooking. And so, when you're making a meal, typically you want good quality ingredients because then the food's going to be tasting better. But if you're using not as good quality ingredients, it's not going to taste as good. And so if you are choosing good samples, then your track is going to come out much better, much like your food would come out better if you're using better ingredients. So I also do think, choosing the right samples that are fitting for the style of music that you're doing too helps dramatically. And so, for example, I will go ahead and play a quick snippet of this demo that I have here, before I go and change anything. So this is how it sounds. Keep in mind the kick and I believe the bass as well are not mixed at all. Yeah, so there's no processing or anything like that on the kick and the bass, but this is how it sounds. So yeah, this kick here actually comes from Unison's Beatmaker sample pack. It's a free pack that you can go and pick up on their website now. I'll leave a link down below in the description. But as you listen to the kick once I solo it, it's really short, really punchy. It's nice and round, but it also has that top end as well. And so let's just say I were to go ahead and use a kick that isn't as fitting for the style of music I'm doing. I have another kick here, and let's just take a listen to that in context. And so as you can see, not as good of a kick. It's way too just like big, and it's kind of taking over the entire mix. I mean, it's definitely a nice and punchy kick, but it's a little too punchy for the style that we're doing. A little too blocky, it sounds like to me. I mean, if we just solo it, like that is a huge kick. Like this is definitely something that I would maybe use in like dance music or something like that, but not for this. You want something that's a bit more kind of subtle, but it still knocks as well. And so, this particular kick is really solid from the get-go. I honestly don't have to do too much processing on this, but there are some things that I can do to make it just knock even harder. All right, so tip number 2 is going to be EQing your kick. And mainly what I want to do to this sample is roll off some of the lows and allow for room for the 808 to come in. Also, still get that nice punch, that knock from my kick. So essentially what you want to do is the kick and the 808 kind of take up similar space in the frequency range. And so by just kind of sculpting each of them to have their own space, they won't phase out with each other, which in turn will just, it takes away the power from each of these elements. And so by EQing them to have their own space in the mix, they'll actually accent each other and they'll hit harder. So I have here the kick. Let me just go ahead and reset this. So essentially, there's this lower information here in the kick. As you can see, there's all this low end information here past 30 hertz. And so typically you can't hear below 30 hertz. So what I do is I go ahead and do this low shelf roll off, and I usually bring it up to around between 40 and 50 hertz. Usually you want your sub here to kind of take over the 30 to 40 hertz range, because that's where a lot of the boom comes from, and you want that boom in your 808s. And so if I just roll that off here, and then what I typically do is I will boost some of these low mids. So that way it kind of brings a bit more presence in the knock of the kick. So let me just go ahead and play that. And as you can see here, the highest peak of the spectrum here is, let's see, looks like it's sitting at A sharp. If you saw that down here at the bottom left, it shows A sharp, 57 hertz. And so I tend to usually boost that just a tad. A sharp. So yeah, we got that kind of nice knock going on now. Whereas before it's there. There we go. Just a tad. It doesn't need too much. Just very subtle. And then I usually play with this Q to kind of dial in the frequencies, make it a bit tighter. You can make it more wider if you need to, but typically just a tight Q band like that will help to dial it in, so it's not adding or it's not enhancing all this extra information that's unnecessary. By the way, if you like the guitar sample that's being used in today's example, you can pick it up in the Unison Beatmaker guitar free sample pack on their website. There'll be a link in the description below where you can pick that up. All right, let's continue with the video. Tip number 3 is going to be compression. Now compression, what it will do, at least in this particular example, it will go and add more weight to your kick, especially since we went and rolled off a lot of the lows of the kick. Just by adding the knock that we did with the EQ, adding the compression to it will just bring that weight back that was kind of taken away. So let me show you. So I have here this glue compressor. Let me go ahead and reset all the settings. And so what I did is basically you can go and turn the attack all the way up or all the way down. This just means that you have a shorter attack. That just means that the compression will kick in like right away. Whereas if I did a slow attack, it will kick in at a later time. I think this is 30 milliseconds here. So next we're going to talk about threshold. And so the threshold is just basically a volume level of when the compression will kick in. And so if I have it all the way up, you know, there's going to be no compression. But as I go and turn this down, then the compression's kicking in and it's kind of squeezing that kick and making it more subdued. And so to go and kind of make up for that, we use this makeup gain here and it'll bring the volume back. But basically, in terms of threshold, usually I will have this around the 2 o'clock position. And then in terms of the makeup, I usually kind of do it about I guess the opposite, around like the 11 o'clock mark. And so then this is how it sounds. You know, if I turn the threshold down, it's not kicking in as much. But with the makeup, it's kind of making the kick clip. But as I turn it down, it's kind of softening the clipping. However, when I do the attack at a much slower, when I turn that all the way up, the transient has a bit more of a clickiness to it, versus if I turn it all the way down, it's a more kind of rounded transient at the beginning of the kick sample. And then as far as for the dry wet, I will go and pull it back. I don't like having it completely wet all the time. Totally just depends, but going and playing with this knob can you can kind of find like that sweet spot when it comes to the actual compression. And so I usually have it around like, say, like the 1 o'clock position or even the 3 o'clock position. So that way there's still a good amount of compression kicking in, but it's not just fully compressed. As you can see, the transient at the beginning is slightly changing. Again, you'll probably need headphones to be able to hear what's going on. But I think probably like right there feels good. It's totally up to you. It's up to taste and everything. But as you can hear, though, it's adding a lot more weight to the kick. Whereas if you turn it off, here it is without. You know, it sounds good. It does sound very clicky, but once I do this, it just feels more heavier. And then this is with a more snappy transient. With the attack, turn it all the way up. So now let's hear it in context of this song and see which one feels better. Let's do it again. I think that's good right there. I do like this, the snappiness. It does make the kick punch through just a little bit more in the mix. Sounds very good. Tip number 4 is saturation. And so saturation is basically just adding color to whatever you apply it to. And so in this particular example, there's 2 different options that we can use. I particularly like using drum bus, but you can also use this saturator plugin here. So we'll kind of listen to both. So here I have the kick. Let me go ahead and turn this off. This is how the kick sounds so far with the compression and the EQ that we've already applied. It has that nice snap to it. But if we were to go ahead and turn on this drum bus and add this little bit of drive, which is the default here, we'll kind of slowly bring it in. Once again, it just adds that little bit of color to the kick, just super subtle. It doesn't need too much. Like if I were to turn it all the way up, it's way too much. We don't need that. So just somewhere around here, like 25%, that feels kind of good. Or maybe a little less. I always find using 20% seems to be the perfect ratio in terms of color for a kick, or kind of pretty much anything. Now, if we didn't use the drum bus and say we just use a saturator, again, it's just a little bit, if I just did anywhere from like 5 to 10 dB, I think 4 feels good. Let's see. It's a little bit too much. Now, what I can do to kind of balance it out is just turn this bass up, or sorry, down. So now, we have that nice weight again to the kick. So maybe somewhere around there. Doesn't need too much. Still got like that snappiness from the transient as well. Whereas if I were to turn it all the way down, you see, it's like just more subtly taken away the more I turn it down. But there's not too much drive going on. Maybe instead of the analog clip, I'll use like a sine. Oh, well, that really makes it more heavier. So as you can see, just by doing that little bit of saturation, it really makes a difference. So in context, and now that I've done that, I am hearing a bit more weight that's kicking in. So I might go and change this EQ a bit and just move this up a bit here. Let's see. There we go, that sounds good. Like right there. So now we're around like 52 hertz, whereas before we were down to like below, like in between like 40 and 45. But now, as you can hear, there's just so much more weight to that kick, so it just hits. I also want to show you guys this one little mini tip. This is something that's kind of specific to Ableton, so if you're not in Ableton, don't worry about this tip. But if you go over here into the preferences, over here to the record warp launch tab, there is this option here where it says create fades on clip edges, and make sure this is turned off. Because if this is on, and if we're using audio samples like this here on the arrangement, then there's going to automatically be these little fades that will look like this on all of your samples whenever you drag them in. So make sure that's turned off. Check all your samples, especially like things with transients like kicks or snares, claps, things like that, and make sure there's no fades like this happening. That will definitely help your kicks, your drums, etc. punch a lot harder as well, making sure that that's not turned on. Alright everyone, just to recap today's video, we went over 4 different tips, and they were sample choice, EQ, compression, and saturation or coloring a sample. And so they will all hopefully get you to achieving bigger and better kicks and just make your mixes just really punch. If you like today's video, please consider subscribing to the channel, leave a thumbs up, and if you have any feedback or any thoughts or any ways that you go and process your kicks, please leave a comment down below. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.